私のことを美人とか言う。
戦いながらイチャついてんじゃねえぞ。
What? It worked out fine for that other Red Sentai anime. We opened this week with Idra examining Togo to see if there was anything inherently unusual about his body that would produce all of the damn Sakamoto explosions, but found nothing. Aw, so we're not gonna get some sort of twist where he turns out to be like the final boss's son? Anyway, to make sure there wasn't really anything unusual about him, Idra figured a blood sample would work, but like many a Red Sentai, he had a bit of a unique phobia in spite of fighting literal monsters on a weekly basis. This led to your typical anime rom-com situation, or Isekai or whatever. Thankfully, we got the opening to the show that, in spite of kind of disappointingly not following the trend of being very Sentai-ish, it was still a really good one on its own. I mean, first of all, the song wasn't all Sentai, and was kind of more of a stylish soft rock by, I think, an up-and-coming singer named Hikaru Makishima. Not at all bad, and I actually appreciate how chill it was. Likewise, the visuals were stylish as all hell, and really highlighted Togo's Sentai equipment that ended up acting as transitions between a bunch of shots, which was rather appropriate for items that were supposed to represent bonds in this universe. Meanwhile, the lyrics of course talked a lot about Kizunas and all that, but also seemed to hint at the idea that Togo needed to forge some new bonds in this Isekai, which he would be able to do with his new adventurer party, who of course we'll see more of soon enough. Overall, just a great anime opening on its own, regardless if it's Sentai or not, and really got across Togo's ideals, and even seemed to foreshadow some of his motivations. Though really, more than Sentai, I was kind of getting more Kamen Rider vibes. Returning to the episode proper, Idra received her status tag, which basically acted as an adventurer's license. And as the name suggested, it also displayed her stats for everyone to see. Sure enough, she had the typical stats of a squishy wizard with insanely good magic and even decent stamina, but sucked at everything else, in particular physical defense and attack. Of course, she also wanted to see Togo's tag, which you'd figure would be the polar opposite of hers, which it kind of was in terms of formatting. Yeah, Togo's was basically a scan from a magazine article, complete with screenshots and guide text, which is just amazing. Though interestingly, they listed his stats, which, yeah, is the purpose of this thing, but normally for magazine articles, they don't do that for Sentai, and definitely not by measuring punching and kicking power, plus jumping ability, as all of that is more Kamen Rider stuff. In fact, comparing it would say the base form of Kamen Rider 01. His stats are actually decently on par with him. Which is unusual, as Kamen Rider is supposed to be way stronger than individual Sentai, who are supposed to rely on team dynamics to save the day, and I'm kind of nerding out right now, aren't I? Also, I guess the stat screen also showed a clip from the special DVDs that are usually packed with the magazines that introduce the characters and their equipment. This bit also made me realize that the narrator of the show, as well as the voice of the Kizuna items, was Tetsuya Inada. He's a very veteran VA, and for Sentai, he played a ton of Monsters of the Week and Generals, but his best known role was probably Doggy Kruger, both for Deca Ranger, and even a Japanese dub of Power Rangers SPD. Yeah, he sounds a tad bit grumpier with that voice. Anyway, they ended up running into the jobbers from the first episode, who kind of understandably tried to badmouth Idra after she did use and abuse them with her golem. However, they did go a little too far when they brought up her father and called him a coward for seemingly abdicating his throne when in reality he was forced out, and even then, he tried his best to better their world into his final days. This got a powerful emotional reaction out of Idra, which almost led to the three duking it out, but of course the Sentai bond stopped them. And while he recognized that fighting was a good bonding exercise, I'd imagine he did that a lot with his blue, he also figured out a supposedly more peaceful and JRPG way of settling things. Thus, they all took part in a quest, with the winner being whoever cleared it first. If the Idra pair won, then the jobbers would never speak ill of her father ever again, and if they won, they could give material to the doujinshi artists as if they weren't already making stuff for this series. Sure enough, they were confident that they were going to win, as they were familiar with this dungeon, but they weren't familiar with their opponents. As a result of Togo's explosion, a bunch of Minotaur were attracted to it and quickly surrounded all of them. Fortunately, the Red Sentai took care of them with a rider kick. Yeah, are you sure you were in the right show, dude? Still, it wasn't quite enough to quell their numbers. Oh, come on, Lei. Did you not hear what Zordon said in the first episode?
Never escalate a battle unless Rita forces you.
And I also think he figured that you shouldn't use a giant mech in a cramped space or else it'll chip the paint. Regardless, he ended up taking out a bunch of cows in the process, and also gave Idra an opening to have a good moment as she ended up saving the jobbers. Because even if they badmouthed her father, like their very people who turned against him, he still worked for their sakes and she wanted to uphold those ideals. Yeah, surprisingly, Miss Fanservice here is going through some pretty decent character development. However, things of course took another turn when the dungeon boss arrived and looked more like something out of Shin Megami Tensei than more of a traditional dungeon crawler. Even Togo ended up admitting that this thing was more of a general level enemy than your typical monster of the week. In particular, he remembered a general named Rejection Trough from episode 19 of his show, and no, I'm not just throwing in random numbers, they actually included an episode title and everything. But yeah, the general was a female ice monster, who interestingly enough was voiced by Haruko Tomatsu, who on top of playing the deuteragonist of another Isekai show and Cure Fortune, she also played Canderilla from Kyoryuger, who I think this character might have taken more than a few cues from. I mean, this monster's design kind of looked like the Debot General, and she even had a human disguise that outright looked exactly like Tomatsu, which in turn looked exactly like Canderilla's human disguise that she used a few times in her show. Again, you gotta appreciate how the show is written by actual Sentai writers who can make these sort of references. This week it was Natsumi Morichi, who was a secondary writer on, again, Boom Booger. Anyway, the plot of this episode was your typical Sentai plot of one of the team being duped by a monster, in this case Kizuna Blue going out with her, and ending up self-destructing when he tried to take full advantage of the all-you-can-eat buffet. Like, dude, I'm pretty sure they're not being literal, and also, if you're taking a girl out, the guy should usually pay the whole bill, especially in your case. Yeah, I kind of ended up siding with Iserilla in this case, but bonds and all that crap. And in the end, they defeated the general with the requisite big cannon weapon, and I kind of like how they took it out in a very Showa monster-esque way, by just kind of having her standing menacingly so that they could be replaced with an obvious prop. With that, Togo figured they could use the Kizuna Buster to defeat the dungeon boss, who rather politely just kind of sat back and let him exposit all this stuff. Of course, he would also need help from everyone else in order to operate it, and since he was the only one with a bond plate, they had to power it indirectly with their actual bonds, which weren't exactly all that tight. I mean, if you really want to sell this stuff, you kind of have to. In fact, I kind of owned a few of these as a kid. The power cannon was a personal favorite. But yeah, it misfired because their bonds weren't tight enough to keep the beam together. And apparently, something similar happened in episode 7 of their show, and yeah, I'm really loving how these little flashbacks are also effective means of fleshing out the Kizuna 5 more. Anyway, Togo ended up taking a nasty hit from the boss and told the others to just make a run for it. However, Idra of course chose not to abandon her ally, and the jobbers actually held back the boss, both to pay her back for the earlier save, and also to let her fully heal Togo so that they could defeat it together. Because for them, they were well aware of the fact that they were looked down on as jobbers who needed to rely on others, but they were perfectly fine with that fact as they were also working to get better, which was something Idra realized wasn't at all dissimilar from her own journey, and yet like the very people who denounced her father, she held an equally nasty prejudice towards lower level adventurers like them. Yeah, Idra is really weighing me over, and not just for the obvious reasons. With new and stronger bonds, the four were able to properly use the Kizuna Buster, defeating the monster, and doing the requisite victory poses that I guess that big gun made them do. However, the monster turned out to be just some old guy who they took back to the village, and the episode ended with him starting to revert back into a monster, only to be stopped by a mysterious cleric and warrior who managed to take it out with just one shot. Yeah, I think I actually like this episode even more than the first, which is quite the achievement. achievement. I think it mostly had to do with the great character development for Idra, but there was also a lot of fun bits, like the episode recaps to Kisna 5. Yeah, I know, it's cheap to do a clip show, but hey, at least there are fun clips. Yeah, again, with a show like this, you can really just feel the love that the staff have for Super Sentai and Tokusatsu in general. Of course, they did this visually with Togo's magazine scans and his introduction DVD, but they also showed the spirit of Super Sentai through the lens of a traditional fantasy RPG setup. Because when you get down to it, there is a lot of overlap in these sorts of stories that emphasize the importance of group dynamics and learning more about each other in order to grow stronger. Idra in particular really stole this episode with her character development in realizing her jerk-ass behavior in the first episode and how her focus on her goals made her forget about the basic tenets of her father's ideals that, ironically, align nicely with Togo's. Speaking of whom, he remains a very lovable Red, and it's also a lot of fun to see and learn more about his old team, complete with some fun references to the best girl from Kyoryuger. I actually really hope that they use more of these show clips, as they're effective means of fleshing out the Kisna 5 without actually having them be there. And overall, this is just a great episode with some good growth out of Idra, even more hilarious references that everyone had to react to, and even some compelling intrigue at the end. Whether or not they fully approved of them, these adventurers definitely earned their victory poses. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy yourself some more geeky rants and references, maybe check out some of our other videos on this channel. We've got Sentai, Riders, and all sorts of anime here, as unlike Idra at the beginning of this episode, we don't discriminate. And until next time though, farewell for now my friends, and yes sir! I'm sorry sir! Yes! I'll go right away sir!